You think you can just cut in front of me like that? Huh? You don't get to do that.
Hey, man.
I'm talking to her. Look at me when I'm talking to you.
Please back up.
No, you don't get to tell me what to do. You think being pregnant means you get a pass?
Not today.
Sir, that's enough. Step back
Get
now.
your hand. You think you can just cut in front of me like that? Huh? You don't get to do that.
Hey, man.
I'm talking to her. Look at me when I'm talking to you.
Please back up.
No, you don't get to tell me what to do. You think being pregnant means you get a pass?
Not today.
Sir, that's enough. Step back
Get
now.
your
One
hand up.
sunny afternoon in Riverside Park, a pregnant woman sat on a bench, enjoying a moment of peace. Within minutes, she would be attacked by a stranger who believed he could do anything without consequences. He kicked her, mocked her, and laughed as the crowd watched in horror. But what he didn't know would change everything. He had no idea who her husband was, or that his entire life was about to unravel in front of dozens of witnesses. What happened next sent shockwaves through the entire city and sparked a conversation that America desperately needed to have. Before we continue, take a moment to think. If you witnessed this happening in front of you, would you speak up or stay silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation alive. Because what happened to Maya Johnson could happen to anyone.
Maya Johnson woke up that Saturday morning with a gentle flutter in her belly. At 7 months pregnant, every movement of her unborn daughter felt like a small miracle. She smiled, placing her hand on her stomach as sunlight streamed through the bedroom curtains of their modest home in the suburbs of Riverside. Her husband, Chief Marcus Johnson, had already left for an emergency meeting at the precinct. As the police chief of Riverside, a position he'd earned through 15 years of dedicated service and community trust, Marcus often worked weekends. But he'd promised Maya he'd be home by dinner to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. Maya decided to spend the morning at Riverside Park, her favorite place in the city. The park was beautiful in late spring, with flowering dogwoods and families enjoying the warm weather. She had been going there since childhood, and now carrying her first child, it felt even more special. A place where she imagined pushing a stroller, teaching her daughter to walk, watching her play on the swings. She dressed in a comfortable light blue sundress, grabbed her book, and drove the 10 minutes to the park. The parking lot was moderately full, typical for a Saturday. Maya found her usual bench near the fountain, a peaceful spot with a view of the duck pond and shade from an old oak tree. For the first hour, everything was perfect. She read a few chapters of her novel, watched children playing, and exchanged smiles with other parents. An elderly couple walking their dog stopped to congratulate her on the pregnancy. A little girl selling lemonade from a nearby stand brought her a cup, refusing payment with a shy smile. This was Maya's community. This was home. Around 11 o'clock, she noticed a commotion near the parking lot. A silver Mercedes SUV had taken up 2 parking spaces, blocking a family trying to load their car. The driver, a young white man in expensive clothes, was arguing loudly with an older Hispanic man about the parking situation. Maya watched as the young man dismissed the complaint with a wave of his hand, his voice carrying across the park. "Do you know who my father is? I park wherever I want." She felt a familiar tightness in her chest. In her 32 years as a black woman in America, Maya had witnessed countless moments like this, entitlement masquerading as authority, privilege wielded like a weapon. But she told herself it wasn't her problem. She was here to relax, to enjoy her pregnancy, to stay calm for the baby. The young man, she would later learn his name was Bradley Whitmore III, strutted into the park with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. He was tall, athletic, wearing a designer blue shirt and white pants that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. His sunglasses were perched on his head, and he carried himself with the swagger of inherited wealth. Maya tried to return to her book, but she couldn't help noticing Bradley's path through the park. He walked directly through a children's soccer game, forcing kids to scatter. He knocked over a little boy's sandcastle without apologizing. He spoke loudly on his phone about bottle service at some exclusive club, his voice drowning out the peaceful atmosphere. When he approached the bench area where Maya sat, she instinctively shifted her position, creating more space. She'd learned this defensive posture over years of navigating public spaces, making herself smaller, less noticeable, trying to avoid confrontation. But Bradley Whitmore III was the type of person who demanded attention, who filled every space he entered with his presence and his entitlement. And on this particular Saturday morning, he would collide with the one woman who didn't deserve his cruelty, and whose husband had the power to finally hold him accountable. The moment their worlds intersected would be captured on a dozen cell phone cameras. It would trend on social media within hours, and it would force an entire community to confront an uncomfortable truth they'd been avoiding for too long. Maya turned the page of her book, completely unaware that in less than 5 minutes, her peaceful morning would transform into the most traumatic and ultimately transformative experience of her life.
Bradley ended his phone call and looked around for a place to sit. There were at least 5 empty benches nearby, but his eyes landed on Maya's bench, the one where she sat alone, quietly reading, bothering no one. He walked directly toward her. Maya sensed him approaching, but didn't look up, hoping he would pass by. Instead, she heard his voice, loud and demanding. "You're going to need to move." She looked up, confused. "Excuse me? I want this bench. Move!" Bradley stood over her, arms crossed, his posture radiating aggression and entitlement. Maya's heart began to race, but she kept her voice calm. "There are several other benches available. I'm just sitting here reading." "I don't care what you're doing," Bradley interrupted, his voice rising. "I want this bench. My family donated money to build this park, which means I have more right to it than you do." Several nearby families had stopped what they were doing, sensing trouble. A few people pulled out their phones, though whether to call for help or record what was happening, Maya couldn't tell. "Sir, this is a public park. Everyone has an equal right to use these benches. I was here first, and I'd like to finish my book. Please choose another spot." Bradley's face reddened with anger. The fact that this woman, this black woman, was refusing his demand seemed to infuriate him beyond reason. He took a step closer, invading her space. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his earlier shouting. "I'm Bradley Whitmore III. My father owns half of the commercial real estate in this city. One phone call from me, and I can make your life very difficult. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Move!" Maya's hands were shaking now, but she stood her ground. She thought about her husband, about what Marcus always told the community. "We don't negotiate with bullies. We stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." "No," she said simply. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Bradley's expression transformed into something ugly, something that Maya recognized with a sickening familiarity. The rage of a person who'd never been told no in his entire privileged life, who couldn't comprehend that someone she considered beneath him would dare to refuse his demands. "You're going to regret this," Bradley said. And then he did something that would haunt Maya in her dreams for months afterward. He kicked her purse off the bench, sending it flying across the ground, its contents spilling onto the grass and pathway. Her phone smashed, her wallet opened, scattering cards and cash. Her prenatal vitamins rolled toward the fountain. "Oops," Bradley said with a smirk. "Guess you'd better go pick that up." Maya stared at her scattered belongings in shock, one hand instinctively moving to her pregnant belly. Around them, the crowd had grown larger. Someone shouted, "Hey, that's not okay!" But no one moved to intervene. That was always how it worked, Maya thought bitterly. People would watch, people would film, but very few would actually step forward to help when it mattered. She rose slowly from the bench, her pregnancy making the movement awkward. She needed to retrieve her things, needed to get away from this man who radiated violence and hatred.
But as she bent down to gather her belongings, Bradley made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his entire life. He sat down on the bench, her bench, and put his feet up, claiming his prize. "That's better," he said loudly, addressing the crowd that had gathered. "Sometimes you have to teach people their place. You know what I mean?" Maya, on her hands and knees, 7 months pregnant, picking up her scattered belongings while her attacker lounged on the bench above her. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone watching. Several people in the crowd looked away, ashamed. A few were recording, their phones capturing every moment. One woman, white, middle-aged, with kind eyes, finally stepped forward and said, "This isn't right. She's pregnant. You should apologize." Bradley laughed. "Apologize? For what? For sitting on a park bench that my family's taxes paid for? I don't think so, lady. Maybe you should mind your own business before you end up like her." The woman stepped back, clearly frightened by the threat in his voice. Maya gathered the last of her belongings and stood up, her dignity intact even as her tears stung her eyes. She was done. She would leave, go home, try to forget this had ever happened. She'd learned long ago that confronting people like Bradley Whitmore rarely ended well for people like her. But as she turned to walk away, Bradley's voice followed her. "Yeah, that's right. Run along. That's what your kind is good at, knowing when you're not wanted." Maya froze. The words hit her like physical blows. Around her, the crowd gasped. Even people who'd been silent until now seemed shocked by the blatant racism in his statement. She turned around slowly, her eyes meeting Bradley's. "What did you just say?" Bradley stood up from the bench, emboldened by what he perceived as her weakness. "You heard me. You people come into our parks, our neighborhoods, and you expect to be treated like you belong here? Well, you don't. This park, this city, it's not for you. It's for people like me, real Americans." The crowd was silent now, everyone frozen in the face of such open hatred. Maya felt something inside her break, not her spirit, but her willingness to stay silent, to make herself small, to accept injustice for the sake of avoiding confrontation. She thought about her unborn daughter, about the world she would inherit, about the lessons she would learn about standing up or staying quiet. "I'm calling the police," Maya said, reaching for her phone. Bradley laughed, a cruel sound that echoed across the park. "Go ahead, call them. You think they're going to take your side over mine? My father plays golf with the mayor. We donate to the police department every year. You're nobody. You're nothing." What Bradley Whitmore III didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that the woman standing before him wasn't nobody. She was the police chief's wife, and in approximately 4 minutes, when the call went out over the radio, Marcus Johnson would hear that his pregnant wife was being threatened in Riverside Park. But before the police could arrive, before Marcus could race to the scene, before justice could be served, Bradley Whitmore III would do something so shocking, so unforgivably cruel, that it would be replayed on news stations across the country. He would kick a pregnant woman, and the cameras would capture everything.
Maya's hands trembled as she tried to dial 911 on her cracked phone screen. The device was barely functional after being thrown to the ground, but she managed to initiate the call. "What are you doing?" Bradley demanded, suddenly realizing she was serious about calling the police. His demeanor shifted from mocking confidence to something more desperate and dangerous. "I'm calling the police," Maya repeated, her voice stronger now. "You assaulted me, you threatened me, and everyone here witnessed it." Bradley's eyes darted around the crowd, suddenly aware of how many phones were pointed in his direction, how many people were recording. For the first time, a flicker of concern crossed his face. But instead of backing down, instead of apologizing or simply walking away, his privilege and rage combined into something toxic and violent. "Give me that phone," he demanded, lunging toward Maya. She stepped back, protecting both the phone and her pregnant belly. "Stay away from me!" The 911 operator's voice came through the damaged speaker. "911, what's your emergency?" "I'm at Riverside Park. A man is threatening me. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I need—"
Bradley's hand shot out, trying to snatch the phone from her grasp. Maya turned her body instinctively to shield her belly, and in that moment, in that crucial, terrible moment that would be analyzed frame by frame on social media and news broadcasts, Bradley Whitmore III made the worst decision of his life. He kicked her. His foot connected with her hip and the side of her pregnant belly, the impact sending Maya stumbling backward. She fell hard onto the concrete pathway, her phone flying from her hand, her arms instinctively wrapping around her stomach to protect her unborn child. The crowd erupted. Screams filled the air. Multiple people shouted for him to stop. A teenage boy ran toward Maya to help her. An older man stepped between Bradley and Maya, finally finding the courage to physically intervene. "What have you done?" someone screamed. "She's pregnant! You just kicked a pregnant woman!" Maya lay on the ground, the pain radiating through her body, but all she could think about was her baby. Was her daughter okay? Could she feel her moving? The panic was overwhelming, drowning out everything else. The shouting crowd, Bradley's voice making excuses, the sound of approaching sirens. "Baby girl," Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please be okay. Please, please be okay." The kind woman who'd tried to intervene earlier knelt beside Maya. "Don't move, sweetheart. The ambulance is coming. You're going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine." But Maya could see it in the woman's eyes. The fear, the uncertainty, the horror at what she'd just witnessed. Bradley stood a few feet away, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what he'd done. His face had gone pale. She got in my way. I was just trying to get the phone. It was an accident. She's faking it for attention." "We all saw what you did," a man in the crowd shouted. "You kicked her deliberately. You kicked a pregnant woman." The sirens grew louder. Bradley looked around frantically, as if searching for an escape route. But there were too many witnesses, too many phones recording, too many people blocking his path. And then, through the crowd, striding with the purposeful speed of someone who'd run the entire distance from his car, came Marcus Johnson. He was still in his police chief uniform from the morning meeting. His badge glinted in the sunlight, and the expression on his face when he saw his wife on the ground, cradling her pregnant belly and crying, was something between absolute terror and cold, focused rage. "Maya!" Marcus dropped to his knees beside his wife, his hands gently cupping her face. "Baby, I'm here. I'm right here. The ambulance is coming. Tell me what happened. Are you hurt? Is the baby—" "He kicked me," Maya sobbed. "Marcus, he kicked me. Our baby. I need to know she's okay. Please, I need to know." Marcus's jaw clenched. He looked up at the crowd, his eyes scanning for the perpetrator. And that's when he saw Bradley Whitmore, trying to quietly slip away through the gathering crowd. "Freeze!" Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "Nobody moves." Bradley stopped mid-step. He turned slowly, and when he saw the uniform, when he saw the rank insignia, when he saw the absolute fury in the police chief's eyes, the blood drained from his face. "Chief Johnson," he whispered. "That's Chief Johnson's wife," someone in the crowd shouted. "You just kicked the police chief's pregnant wife." Bradley's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on the grass, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his privileged bubble. He hadn't just assaulted a random woman in the park. He'd assaulted the wife of the most powerful law enforcement official in the city. And every second of it was recorded. Marcus radioed for immediate backup and an ambulance as he held Maya's hand, his professional composure barely containing the storm of emotions underneath. Other officers arrived within moments, followed by paramedics. As the EMTs carefully examined Maya and prepared to transport her to the hospital, as officers read Bradley Whitmore his rights and placed him in handcuffs, as the crowd of witnesses gave their statements, a question hung in the air. What happens when privilege and power collide with justice and accountability? And in a country still grappling with systemic racism and inequality, would this time, this moment, finally be different?
The ambulance rushed Maya to Riverside General Hospital, with Marcus following close behind in his vehicle, his lights flashing, his heart pounding with a fear he'd never experienced before. In his years as a police officer, he'd faced armed suspects, dangerous situations, life or death decisions, but nothing compared to the terror of potentially losing his wife or unborn child. At the hospital, doctors performed an emergency ultrasound. The wait felt eternal. Maya lay on the examination table, squeezing Marcus's hand, both of them holding their breath. And then they heard it, the strong, steady heartbeat of their daughter. "The baby is fine," the doctor announced, relief evident in her voice. "Strong heartbeat, good movement. You were very lucky, Mrs. Johnson. The impact was mostly to your hip and side. You're going to have some serious bruising, and we want to keep you overnight for observation, but your baby appears unharmed." Maya and Marcus broke down in tears, holding each other, thanking God and fate and whatever protective force had shielded their child from harm. But the physical recovery was only part of the story. While Maya rested in her hospital bed, the video had gone viral. Within 6 hours of the incident, footage from a dozen different angles had been shared millions of times across social media. #JusticeForMaya was trending nationally. News outlets from across the country were covering the story, and the city of Riverside found itself at the center of a national conversation about racism, privilege, and accountability. Bradley Whitmore III was arrested and charged with assault, battery, hate crime enhancement, and attempted destruction of evidence. Despite his father's wealth and connections, despite the expensive lawyers who immediately descended to defend him, the evidence was overwhelming. The videos showed everything. His racist comments, his deliberate violence, his complete lack of remorse until he realized who Maya's husband was. But the story didn't end with Bradley's arrest. The Riverside community experienced a reckoning. The incident forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about the subtle and not-so-subtle racism that existed in their supposedly progressive city. Town halls were organized. Difficult conversations happened. Maya's story became a catalyst for change, not just punishment for one violent man, but a broader examination of how Black families experienced public spaces differently, how pregnant Black women faced disproportionate violence and dismissal, how systemic inequality manifested in everyday interactions. Maya herself became an unexpected voice in this movement. Once she recovered, she gave a single interview that was viewed by millions. Her words were powerful, measured, and unforgettable. "What happened to me in Riverside Park wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something much larger, a society where certain people believe they have the right to occupy any space, to treat others as inferior, to use violence without consequence." Bradley Whitmore kicked a pregnant woman in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses, because he genuinely believed nothing would happen to him. That's privilege. That's what we need to change. She continued, "But I also want to talk about the people who stood there and watched, the people who recorded but didn't intervene, the people who looked away, who stayed silent, who waited for someone else to act. Racism doesn't just survive because of the Bradley Whitmores of the world. It survives because good people choose comfort over courage, silence over solidarity. When you see injustice, especially when it doesn't directly affect you, you have a choice. What will you choose?" Her words resonated across the nation. They sparked debates in living rooms, classrooms, and boardrooms. They challenged people to examine their own complicity in systems of oppression. 3 months later, Maya gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Hope, a name that felt both fitting and prophetic. On the day she was born, Bradley Whitmore pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, the maximum allowed under the law. It wasn't just about punishment, though. His case set a legal precedent for hate crime enhancement in assault cases, strengthening protections for marginalized communities. The bench where Maya had been sitting became a memorial of sorts. The community installed a plaque that read, "In honor of Maya Johnson and all who have faced injustice in spaces that should be safe for everyone. May we build a community where everyone belongs." But perhaps the most profound impact wasn't captured in news headlines or legal precedents. It was in the hundreds of people who reached out to Maya, sharing their own stories of discrimination and violence. It was in the community members who began speaking up when they witnessed injustice instead of staying silent. It was in the schools that used her story to teach about civil rights and standing up for what's right. It was in the countless small moments where people chose courage over comfort. A year after the incident, Maya returned to Riverside Park for the first time since that traumatic day. She brought baby Hope, now a smiling, curious infant, and Marcus walked beside them, ever protective but also proud of her wife's strength. People recognized her. Some approached to thank her, others simply nodded in solidarity. A few parents stopped to let their children meet Hope, using the moment to teach their kids about justice, equality, and the importance of standing up for others. Maya sat on that same bench, the one that had been the site of so much hatred and violence, and she nursed her daughter in the afternoon sunshine. And in that simple act, she reclaimed the space. She declared that hate would not have the final word, that fear would not dictate where she could exist, that her daughter would inherit a world where people fought back against injustice, where bystanders became allies, where hope was more than just a name. As she looked out at the park, at the children playing, at the diverse families enjoying the beautiful day, Maya thought about the question she'd posed in her viral interview. What will you choose? The answer, she realized, was written not in one moment, but in thousands of small choices made every day by ordinary people deciding to be extraordinary. So I ask you now, as you finish this story, what will you choose? When you see injustice, will you record from a distance, or will you intervene? When someone needs help, will you wait for someone else to act, or will you be the one who steps forward? The Bradley Whitmores of the world only have power because good people choose silence. But you, yes, you watching this right now, you have the power to change that. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it with your family, your friends, your community, because Maya's story isn't just about one woman and one terrible day. It's about all of us and the world we're building together, one choice, one moment, one act of courage at a time.